exploit animals for our own benefit.
The animal rights movement has launched an assault against the use of animals in medical research.
There are no alternatives to the use of animals in much of biomedical research.
Other animals are equal to us in the sense that they have a life of their own.
It's hard to believe that 20 years ago, heart transplants weren't performed. Now doctors perform them almost routinely. Transplants and many other medical advances were made possible because of research done with animals. But that animal research is causing a rift between the science community and animal activists. As Animal Rights Awareness Week comes to a close, today on Assignment Sunday, we'll focus on this very divisive issue. Hi, I'm Walter Rasulullah. It's estimated that every year in the United States, 20 to 70 million animals are used for some sort of testing and research. Many of those animals wind up suffering, which brings up the question, do animals have rights? WRAL TV5, Denise Boyer looks at the issue.
A few months ago, Christy Rose was days away from death. Cystic fibrosis was suffocating her, starving her of air. You can see the results after a successful double lung transplant. Her friend Misty Fisher now waits for her chance.
Well, I feel like animals have saved my life, because if they didn't do transplants on the animals first, they would have never developed this technique.
The surgical techniques for lung transplantation were initially developed and the skills honed in animal models. You could not do lung transplantation in human beings without first doing it in animals.
NC State philosophy professor and animal rights activist Tom Regan says we need to move away from animal research, look for alternatives.
We encourage the surgeon to learn to heal by learning to kill.
And People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, has put together a convincing campaign. These shocking tapes circulate the country in an effort to accelerate momentum for the animal rights movement.
And we're afraid that animals are being used for profit, which is our main concern. No, we don't want animals used at all. But until that point can come, we want alleviation of a lot of useless research.
And the heavy blows of the animal rights movement are aimed at medical research. The issue has become more than rights, it's animal equality.
Other animals are equal to us in the sense that they have a life of their own that's of importance to them, of value to them, apart from any usefulness they have to us.
But biomedical researchers say, frankly, people are more important than animals.
Is it ethical to do something in a human before you've taken every conceivable measure, every reasonable measure to reduce the risk to that human and to enhance the possibility of success in that human being?
And what I'm not seeing in this area, for example, are those visionary scientists who are willing to say, we can do better. We can investigate and try to find ways of finding out what we want to find out without using animals.
Dr. Malin Coetzee is one of those visionary scientists. He is using computers that will replace some animals in the laboratory.
It means that the people that do the animal research use only the minimum number of animals. For example, you might be able to reduce the number of animals used or reduce the number of kinds of experiments that are done. In other words, it directs the experiment to get the very best and most useful data.
The issue isn't just reducing the number of animals in research. It's not just doing away with cruelty. The animal rights movement wants all animals released from the laboratory. As Tom Regan put it, we don't want larger cages, we want empty cages. Joining us today to discuss the topic further are Dr. Robert Wood, a medical researcher at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Dr. Charles McPherson, Director of Animal Resources at North Carolina State University, and Gail Hebner, a local animal rights activist, and Dietrich von Haugwitz, the Education Director for the North Carolina Network for Animals. Dr. Wood, empty cages in the research labs, is that possible?
It would be very nice, but it's not possible.
And why not?
A lot of people think that we can use computers to replace animals. people that think that know a little bit about computers, very little about animals, and virtually nothing about research. Computers are an adjunct to all research, but they do not replace the experimental tools. If we knew enough to program the computer, we'd have the answers that we sought, and we wouldn't need to do the studies to begin with. If you really think computers can do it all, just look at the space program. How many times have we seen rockets go astray, launches delayed, etc., because the computer programs weren't correct?
Some tests that are performed on animals come out, you get a result on the animals, but then when they're used in humans, there are some problems. Why does this happen?
Well, certainly animals and people are not identical. They're not the same. However, the fact of the matter is that the basic biological functions are highly conserved. By that we mean they remain very similar across species. And therefore, you are able to use animals to understand the basic biological functions, functions of the immune system, for example, functions of the cardiovascular system. And in the end result, you learn enough so that you can safely conduct clinical trials on human beings. Obviously, for research that's going to benefit human beings, the clinical trial is the end stage of that. Now, I myself am a veterinarian, of course, and the research that is done that we use animals for is applied directly to animals.
Mm-hmm. Gail, many animal rights activists are recommending certain things such as alternatives to current methods of testing, such as replacing the animal in the lab. And we've talked a little bit, we've mentioned a little bit in the story certainly about computers and reducing the use of animals or refining procedures so that pain is reduced. What kind of headway is being made at this point?
I think tremendous headway is being made, and I noticed in the opening narrative there was a reference to 20 years ago that there were not heart transplants, and it's inconceivable now that there wasn't such a thing. I think we also need to remember that 20 years ago we were still using rabbits to test pregnancy test verification, and of course that is an outmoded model. Now there have been other faster, more technological replacements, and so I think the question that the animal rights movement is asking most pointedly is how quickly is progress being made? What are the limits? I don't think any of us probably here on the panel would even attempt to say what the potentials for animal replacement are. I don't think it's a finite delimiter, and I think that the progress that's being made has showed tremendous promise, and I think the potential is really quite substantial. One of the the things that we also talk about is rethinking what may have always seemed to have been absolute fact. There was a time I was raised with a generation thinking that meat had to be part of the diet for us to be healthy. And of course we now know that that's not true. So I think that one of the things that we ask researchers and the public both to do is to throw away some old assumptions and let's be creative and innovative and ask some other very, very challenging questions on what are the potentials and how can they be done. One other thing, with we don't suggest that only computer modeling is the only replacement for animals. There are many medium that can be used, and so I would not agree that computers will be the replacement for animals. They will be part of the bag of tools.
Dietrich, what kind of progress do you see through your organization on getting animals out to the laboratory?
I think there's great progress. It works very slowly, but of course the area of animals and research is only one small part on which we always seem to concentrate, one small part of what the animal rights movement is trying to propagate. In some other areas, of course, progress is faster in areas that are less controversial. Progress is occurring. I think it is quite clear that while this century perhaps has been devoted in biomedical research to the use of animals, the next century won't be. I think there is agreement, even among researchers, that the ultimate goal must be the elimination of animals from research. Right now, the disagreement is over how seriously we take the commitment to true reforms, to reductions, to refinements, and to replacements. And I think, if you'll allow me, I will straighten out a misconception that is often, I'm afraid, propagated also by the media, that the disagreement here is between, on the one side, a lot of starry-eyed, emotional, ignorant people in the public who are animal lovers, and on the other side, the unanimous consensus of the professional researchers. That simply is not a fact. We have here today two good, eloquent spokesmen of what I would call the traditional research community. There is out there across the nation today what I might call a progressive community of researchers, not just a few, but thousands of researchers. They have a number of professional organizations. They very much disagree with the statements that we have heard here today. They point out to us that it simply is not a fact that we owe all advances in biomedical research to animals. There are many, many advances and breakthroughs that have been done without the use of animals. And furthermore, they point out how many times the use of animals has led us in the wrong direction, has hampered rather than expedited research, and has led to thousands of very tragic mistakes. I could tell you story after story of the famous incidents of isoprenaline that caused 3,500 human deaths and other drugs. 4 million Americans are hospitalized every day for serious side effects of drugs. All these were tested on animals.
Let's, Dr. Wood, would you like to respond to that?
Let me partially disagree and partially agree with you. First of all, the animal rights movement is not the only driving force behind replacing animals for certain purposes. I remember, for example, some years ago we used to use not even rabbits, but frogs for pregnancy tests.
Right.
And I remember seeing a laboratory report that said, sorry, frog hopped away. Well, clearly it's better from everybody's perspective, for the frogs, the patients, everybody, to use a test tube instead of an animal for that kind of purpose. But at that time, that was the best that science could offer. But part of what science does is to find new and better ways. Now, I would take great umbrage at your statement that most scientists are really in disagreement with the, quote, traditional view that animals are necessary. Animals definitely are necessary for the bulk of the work that is done in biological science. There are many other adjunctive measures that can be used, but animals form the basis. We cannot, as the example you gave, test a drug in an animal and thereby prove that it's going to be safe in a human. But if we test a drug in an animal and all the animals die, you see the moral alternative to testing that drug initially in a human being. That we ethically cannot do. Now, we cannot test the drug in the test tube, in a computer, and determine what effect it's going to have on a living organism, an intact animal. We can use tissue culture cells, but they're very primitive. They're one cell type, which, by the way, comes from an animal, but they're by no means organized the same way that the animal is organized. There's no nerves, no circulation. There are many things, no hormones, etc., that are existent in the intact animal, all of which interact and can therefore only be evaluated in the intact animal. We then go to several animal species, and if everything is go, then very carefully we proceed to testing in humans. But it's unethical, immoral, in my opinion, to take a drug in a test tube and say, oh, let's use it in humans, it might help them.
Let's take a break right here. We're going to take a break right here, and we'll come back with this discussion.
Toyota Convoy is coming to town.
Next stop, Raleigh.
Yes, for a limited time. Toyota Convoy is at Raleigh Toyota with hundreds and hundreds of deep discounted Toyota cars and trucks.
Double deal savings on Camry.
Corollas.
Convertibles.
Trucks.
Double deal savings on Tercel from just $69.92.
Camrys from $11,488.
And the all-new Toyota For sale, just $99.88. $99.88.
That's double deal savings.
But this convoy won't stay long.
So hurry to Raleigh Toyota on Highway 70 at the airport.
You heard about Washington. You saw what happened in New York City. Now experience a night to remember. June 29th, Carter Finley Stadium. Kenny Rogers, K.T. Oslin, Freddie Jackson, Sandy Patty, Joe Piscopo, and more. June 29th, Carter Finley Stadium. A night to remember. For tickets, call Ticketmaster at 919-834-4000. Order today. Tickets are limited.
Well, the animal rights movement has become very shrill, and it's gotten out of hand. It has intimidated researchers to slow down on some of the important things that they are doing because they're afraid of the way the animal rights people might attack them personally or their laboratories.
There are many people such as C. Everett Koop and the present Surgeon General who believe the animal rights movement is a threat to the future of science and human health. Research laboratories are often ransacked, burned, and bombed by activists trying to stop cruelty to animals. It's for these reasons that state lawmakers are looking at a bill that would essentially protect researchers and their work. Some university labs in this area have already installed security systems, guards, and locked up labs for fear of retaliation from animal rights movement. Dr. McPherson, have you had to reach that point in North Carolina
We've
State?
not reached that point. We certainly take extra precautions for security. However, the intimidation works in very subtle ways. For example, my field is laboratory animal medicine. I'm responsible for medical care of animals that are used in research. And I have had veterinary students come to me and say, I'm interested in this field. I would like to do that. I would like to work in the laboratory providing care for those animals. But I'm concerned about the threats, the intimidation, the possibility of destruction of things in a facility if I should be working there. I'm not sure I want to go into that field. In a similar way, I think young scientists in other fields have really thought twice about going into research, going into medicine, because of the intimidation that comes to some people working in this area. On the program that was aired about a week ago with Denise Boyer, I noticed that an investigator at UNC Greensboro had received some very threatening and vile kinds of communications and letters, and that sort of thing can really inhibit you from doing what you think you ought to and what you want to do. So it works not only by the direct things of arson and break-ins and so on, which have happened in a number of places, but by subtle ways also.
Dietrich, these kinds of methods, which oftentimes are connected with the animal rights activists, they seem so in balance with the ideas that you're portraying to save the animals, be kind, and then the organizations are doing these kinds of things. How do you respond to that? Okay.
The organizations are not doing this kind of thing. In a way, this is a magnificent propaganda tool now.
Are these people connected with the organization or not?
We are talking about a movement that comprises between 10 and 12 million people today. The people who do those acts are a handful, a couple or 3 dozen or so. They are not a particular organization. The mainstream organizations like the Humane Society of the United States has just recently come out with a complete condemnation of these tactics. Certainly, I, with my organization, we pursue educational goals. We want to discuss these issues. They are serious ones. We are in no way connected with this. There are some desperate individuals in this movement who feel talking will never get you anywhere. You've got to do something to get the media's attention, and in that way they are right, because the media is fascinated with this sort of thing. Let us remember that all the great social movements have those wings. The peace movement had it. The civil rights movement had it, and you know what Martin Luther King thought of that wing. More recently, the anti-abortion movement tragically has that wing. We must stop judging the movement and the very serious philosophical ideas that move this movement. We must stop connecting them with the doings of a few people who take the law into their own hand.
Would it be fair to turnabout as fair play and agree that misuse of animals in scientific research is the rare exception, just as the criminal lunatics who break into laboratories are the rare exception in the animal rights movement?
I would not agree with this, and let me get
because you're ill-informed.
Let me get you one example, perhaps, and that ties in with what was earlier said. Very recently, perhaps all of us have read in the newspaper a very interesting statement by David Korn, the chairman of the National Cancer Institute. He said the following: all the animal experiments that we have undertaken in the past 35 years have yielded little or nothing in the way of producing a cure for cancer. We have used the wrong screening device. And of course, billions of dollars has been spent. It is now declared that was for naught. He later said, we must move away from this and go on to, yes, computer-driven devices. That comes from a healthcare professional of that man's stature. And there are many, many eminent physicians and people in cancer research who have said the same thing. So again, this is not an animal rights line. That is a line of professionals in the field.
And I would like to add also a very little known fact, and that is that I do believe that researchers are subjected to this kind of harassment, and I don't condone it, and I think most responsible people in the movement don't condone it. However, it is not only the researchers who are on the victim end of that. There have been animal rights activists who have had dead animals arrive in their mailboxes to them. There have been a recent president of the CETA, Students for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, a graduate student at UNC, received threatening phone calls on his telephone answering machine. He and his wife did. Those were turned over to the custody of the police. Those tend not to get the media attention, but there are zealots on both sides who feel very threatened by any form of change. I think that's human nature to some extent. So I would just like to put it on the record that it's not only the researchers who receive that.
I think we can agree with that, but
comment.
I object strenuously to the characterization of all biomedical research as, quote, cruelty,
I don't
unquote.
characterize.
And that's what I'm seeing and hearing from you guys all the time. That is simply not true.
I don't know very many researchers on a personal basis. The ones that I do are not cruel. Mm-hmm. And they are, what I also would like to...
Nor is what they do cruel.
What I would like to submit, however, is that social progress is part of human history. It always has been, it always will be. And I think that speaks well to us as a species. I think this is another addendum to that. Anytime there is social progress, there is displacement of the tradition. I think if we were to go back and look at slavery, the fact that some slaves were well treated does not justify slavery. What we are asking is that the research community put a priority on replacement of animals, on refining condition and reducing the numbers.
Dr. McPherson had a point here.
I'd like to come back to this point that scientists, there's a substantial body of scientists who have the opinion that animal research is not necessary or not good, or we haven't made progress with it. Probably the most prominent group that's advancing this position is a group called the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. They recently have been censured and essentially called on the carpet by the AVMA because of misrepresentations that they have made. They have represented this point of view that we've heard here. The fact of the matter is that 99% of the physicians believe that animal research has led to medical progress. 97% believe it should continue, that it's essential that it continue. So we're certainly not talking about a substantial body of scientists or medical people that think animal research is not valuable and should not be continued.
May I ask another question? The last figure that I was provided
only have a minute, so.
by HSUS on how much of the billions of dollars annually spent on animal research is devoted exclusively to developing alternatives. It was less than 0.5% of that money. A question that I have is, do you feel like it should be a priority within your research area, and are you working towards that? And if it's not a priority for the research community, who should it be a priority for?
It's part of the priority of every research project. When you ask a question, you then look at methodology. What is the best way to answer this question? Must I use animals or not? If so, which species? And use the lowest species possible.
Yes, but
and use all means possible to reduce the number, not only for simple cost and other issues, but you know, why use animals unnecessarily? This is part of the basic philosophy of scientists.
Yeah,
actively developing alternatives.
Actively developing alternatives.
I hate to stop us here, but we're going to have to stop. Yeah. We'll be right back in just a moment.
I'm Charlie Gaddy. In all my years of reporting the news, one of the best moments I will always remember is when our servicemen and women returned home from the Persian Gulf. They came back with something that I think we all feel now, a sense of pride and patriotism. We owe them a great debt of gratitude, and if you want to say thank you, tell them in person in what could be North Carolina's most patriotic moment ever.
North Carolina salutes the troops. Call 834-4000 for tickets.
Before there was Eddie Murphy, before there was Richard Pryor, this controversial comedian was making thousands blush all over the country. Coming up on the next Entertainment Tonight, Red Fox tells how he's coming back to TV in a racy new comedy.
It flowed for me. It was kind of easy.
He nearly lost it all to the IRS, but now he's fighting his way back to prime time with his...
Decide 1 minute, so decide who's going to speak.
May I ask a question? I would like to believe, I hear researchers often saying that they do not believe in any unnecessary suffering or pain on the behalf of animals. And I would like for this to be an opportunity, I would like to hear from you that, in fact, you do use cruelty-free products where you can. By this, I mean toothpaste and shampoos and cosmetics, that you actively support Revlon, other companies like that have suspended animal testing. The other thing I would like to hear from you is that you're vegetarian. The medical empirical data is compelling, and it certainly has an impact on animals.
Well, it's a personal decision whether you want to use cruelty-free products or be a vegetarian, or wear animal-derived garments or anything like that. I think the real issue here is one about medical research. And the thing that I really object to is if people are interfering and objecting to and advocating positions that will ultimately affect my health. If they're going to inhibit research, make research unlawful, say that it shouldn't be done, not support it, so that it's going to affect my health and the health of my family and friends, I
thank you all very, very much. And we've got to close. And without a doubt, this question of animal rights will continue to be an issue throughout the decade. We hope that today we've helped to inform you on a topic that obviously runs deep with emotion. And until next week, for Assignment Sunday, I'm Walty Rasulullah.